The year the harvest failed, the world did not end in fire, it ended in silence. Fields lay empty, wells froze solid, and the smell of smoke clung to every street as families burned the last of their roofs to stay alive. But survival came with a price one history has tried to bury. What they did to endure those months will change the way you see the Middle Ages forever. Snow draped the village in a weight that was more than weather. It pressed on roofs, on shoulders, on lungs. It softened every sound until even the footsteps of the living seemed stolen, muffled beneath the white. The streets lay empty, their paths hidden beneath drift and ice, their boundaries marked only by the jagged shapes of fences bowed under the burden of frost. This was not a snow that danced or sparkled. It was a snow that settled in judgment, choosing what would remain and what would not. The only mark of warmth was a thread of smoke that rose from a lone chimney, twisting into the pale sky. Inside, the last hearth burned low, its flame a stubborn ember in a season that wanted nothing but darkness. The air was thick with the sour scent of damp wool drying too close to the fire, of nettles boiled until their bitterness turned to water. The pot hung heavy over the coals, though its contents were light enough to vanish in a single swallow. A mother moved slowly in that dim light, her fingers trembling not from age, but from the ache of cold that never left her. The skin of her hands was cracked, each fissure lined with white, where blood had frozen before it could flow. She looped a ragged cord around her child's waist, pulling the edges of a tunic together that had been worn to threads years before it should have been. She tied the knot tight, though she knew it was no shield against the air that crept in through every seam of the cottage beyond the village's edge. The earth was iron. Men trudged into the forest, their axes dulled and blades notched, searching for trees already dead, so the living wood could be spared until spring. They followed the sound of their own breath, the crunch of frost beneath boots, the distant groan of branches heavy with snow. No one spoke much on these walks, words wasted. Breath and breath was needed to keep the blood from stilling. In the barns, the livestock had become more bone than flesh. A cow coughed in the dimness, each heave echoing like a hollow drum. Her ribs rose like the slats of her pen, her milk long since dried. The chickens no longer clucked but sat silent on their roosts, feathers puffed in a futile attempt at warmth. Every living thing moved less, conserving a kind of currency that could not be counted but could be lost in an instant. Night came too early, as though the day no longer had the strength to defend itself. In the dark, the villagers gathered in the church, the only building whose stones seemed older than the winter itself. Frost clung to its walls from the inside, blooming in patterns like pale flowers on the stone. The altar candles burned low, wax dripping in slow, luminous tears. Shadows moved across the faces of the kneeling, making their hollow cheeks seem deeper, their eyes darker. The priest spoke of Job, of patience, of faith that survives beyond the hunger of the body. His voice trembled as it rose toward the rafters, the sound thinner than it once had been. Some said it was from the cold, others knew it was because his belly was as empty as theirs. When the prayers ended, heads remained bowed, not in devotion, but in exhaustion. In the corners of the church, where the candlelight could not reach, words turned to whispers. These were not the prayers of the faithful, but the reckoning of the desperate. Who still had grain hidden beneath the floorboards? Who had seen a hare dart through the snow near the hedgerow? Whose child had not yet taken to coughing? Outside, the wind shifted. It rose from a sigh to a voice, rattling the iron latch on the chapel door. The sound was sharp, insistent, as though a visitor had come and waited, impatient for entry. The villagers heard it, but did not lift their eyes. Some prayed harder, their lips pressed tight against words they could not voice. Others sat still, listening, as if to measure whether the sound was truly the wind. In their hearts they knew it was something else. Winter had come to the village not as a season, but as a sovereign. It walked the lanes unseen, counted the fires still burning, marked the houses where silence had already claimed the rooms. Each gust was a hand at the latch, each flake a seal on the fate of the living dot. By morning, snow would cover every track, every sign of who had risen and who had not. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of their firelight, the sky was already gathering more of it. The next storm was coming, and with it, the long shadow of a hunger that would decide who would greet the thaw and who would remain beneath it. A pale dawn bleeds across the horizon, the sun no more than a weak coin pressing through the fog, offering no warmth to the land it claims to rule. The river lies frozen into jagged glass, a cruel mirror that traps the shadows of reeds beneath its skin. Children kneel at its edge, small shapes wrapped in rags, chipping at the ice with dull stones. Their fingers are numb, their knuckles raw, their breath a fleeting cloud that vanishes before it can be seen twice. The sound is faint, a hollow tapping that travels across the water like the whisper of bones knocking together. A brittle silence hangs between the houses, as if the village itself has learned that speaking wastes strength. The stillness breaks only when a wooden latch lifts, its creak loud in the cold. An old man steps into the pale light, his back bent, his eyes fixed downward. A sack hangs over his shoulder, so light it barely dents the curve of his spine. He walks toward the communal granary, the only building in the square that seems to hold purpose. Its door is barred by a heavy beam, blackened with age, a piece of timber that has endured more winters than any living man here. Once there had been truss grain kept for the whole village, guarded not by fear but by faith. That was before the hunger settled in like a siege. Now the villagers take turns standing watch, each shift a silent trial of loyalty. Every glance between neighbors is a question. Every hour alone with the key is a temptation. The grain is measured, not only in weight, but in the lives it will or will not save. The old man places his sack on the frozen ground, nods to the guard without words, and sits on a low stool to wait for his turn, his breath curling in the air like the smoke from a dying candle. The smoke from the chimneys smells wrong now, not the rich bite of oak or pine, but the flat, bitter reek of burning straw. The last resort when wood has vanished, when even the wet roots have been torn from the earth. In the fields beyond, scarecrows stand gaunt and useless, their burlap heads dusted white, their arms locked in frozen gestures that look like begging. The crows no longer fear them. Hunger makes even birds brave. By midday, the women gather in the manor's courtyard, bowls held in hands that tremble more from weakness than cold. They wait for their ration, a ladle of barley water, thin as breath, poured from an iron cauldron whose steam rises in pitiful wisps. The steward stands above them on the stone steps, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, his cheeks pink from the heat of the manor hearth. His eyes move over the crowd like someone counting coins. He never speaks more than he must. The ladle dips, the bowls are filled, and no one lingers longer than it takes to receive their portion in the crowd. A young woman's grip fails. Her bowl slips, strikes the ground, and tips its watery prize into the snow. For a moment, the liquid steams, then sinks away into nothing. She stares down at the empty bowl, her face unreadable. She does not kneel to scrape at the snow, does not plead for more. She simply turns, pulling her shawl tighter, and walks home. Her shadow stretches across the courtyard, long and thin, as if the light itself has learned to withhold by nightfall. The moon rises cold and high, casting the village into a world of shuttered windows and locked doors. Outside, the wind carries the low growl of wolves, bold enough now to press their noses against the wood, to sniff at the seams where warm air leaks out. They prowl between the houses, their paws leaving prints like black holes in the snow. Inside one of the cottages, a man sits hunched over a piece of driftwood. His knife moves slowly, carving a small cross. The strokes are deliberate, almost tender, each curl of wood falling like a shaving of bone. His stomach groans, but he does not stop. The cross will not feed him, yet still he makes it. Perhaps it is a prayer, perhaps it is an apology. In the stillness of the room, with the wolves pacing outside and the cold pressing in from the walls, it feels less like hope and more like a confession whispered to the darkness. And somewhere in that darkness, beyond the reach of the hearth, something waits, the next choice, the next hunger, the next act that will decide who survives to see another dawn. The bell tolls once at midday, its sound low and hollow, shivering through the still air like a warning rather than a call. No feast waits, no laughter spills from doorways, no tables are set. It is not a summons to gather in joy, but to work. Under a sky the color of old iron, the snow has grown heavy on the thatched roofs, a weight so thick it bends the beams beneath. Men climb with long ash poles, striking at the drifts until they slide loose in slabs, breaking against the frozen ground. Each blow sends a dull thud into the bones, and the sound echoes between the cottages like the heartbeat of a tired village. The smell of tallow smoke hangs in the air, thick and sour, drifting from the manor's tall windows. Candles burn there, their golden light spilling over tables laid for comfort the villagers will never touch. In the cottages, night is lit by embers and faith alone. At the well, a line forms, boots sinking into slush that soaks through leather, numbing toes. The rope groans as it turns, damp fibers stiff with frost, its creak keeping time with the shiver of hands. Each bucket is drawn slowly, carefully, as if the water beneath might carry some secret. Some look into the black depth and see only themselves, distorted in the ripples. Others glance quickly away, unwilling to meet the reflection that hunger has hollowed. Near the lane, a widow crouches beside a basket of roots she has dragged from beneath the frozen earth. They are twisted, pale things, bitter enough to turn the stomach. Her knife moves without pause, scraping away rot from flesh. the blade worn smooth from years of the same desperate work. Her son kneels beside her, breath clouding the air in short bursts. He stares at the glint of the knife in the gray light, his small hands rubbing together for warmth. At the village edge, boys walk in silence, their boots crunching over frost. Sticks tipped with cloth smolder in their hands, embers glowing faintly in the dim. They carry no bags, no traps, only fire. Their task is wordless, known without need for speaking. Hunger has thinned their faces into something older than their years. The woods will give them nothing freely. They must take it, smoke it from its hiding places, drive the small, trembling lives from their burrows. The snow swallows their footsteps. As they vanish among the trees, evening comes in shades of bruised violet, the frost crawling like glass over every door and window. Breath hangs in the air as the church doors open, their hinges groaning against the cold. The priest steps into the threshold, wrapped in a robe patched many times over, and rings the vespers bell. The sound rises into the sky and dies quickly. In the wind, as if heaven itself has turned its face away. His breath curls upward, pale and thin, and fades before it reaches the stars. A single candle burns in its brass holder, its flame trembling as though it senses its own fragility. The light casts a shadow of the crucifix high upon the wall, a shadow larger than the wooden figure it imitates. It looms over the empty pews, its darkness deep and steady, unmoved by the flicker of the flame. Outside, the wind prowls through the village, rattling shutters, whispering along the eaves, carrying with it the scent of the deep woods and the faint cry of something far beyond the reach of any bell. The night settles over them, not with peace, but with the heavy patience of a predator. Somewhere in the black weave of the forest, the boys move between the trunks, the glow of their torches marking the last warmth many creatures will ever see. And in the cottages, the villagers wait, each in their own silence, knowing that tomorrow the bell will toll again. The first snow had fallen weeks ago, soft as ash, but now it lies in jagged ridges where the wind has gnawed it thin. The road into the village is a ribbon of frozen mud, patterned with the prints of bare feet, some small, some large, none wearing shoes. The frost bites into skin without mercy, leaving a raw pink bloom on every exposed toe. The prints overlap like the ghosts of those who have walked this way before, a silent procession toward survival or surrender in the square. A fire burns low in a stone pit, its embers smoldering as though reluctant to part with their last breath. The heat is claimed by those willing to brave the open air, their shadows twisting in the orange light. A woman in a wool hood leans over it, gripping a blackened pot with both hands. Steam rises for a moment before disappearing into the cold, as if even the air is hungry, stealing the warmth before the villagers can taste it. Inside the pot is a broth thin enough to see the bottom cabbage leaves swirling in a pale water, and a single bone that has been boiled so often it holds no flavor. This bone passes from house to house as though it were a relic from a saint, a small reminder of a time when meat could be taken for granted. On the manor wall, a banner snaps. In the wind, its colors muted under a skin of frost. The reeve stands beneath it, cloak drawn tight, a ledger clutched in his hand. He counts the sacks of grain delivered as tax, his quill scratching across the page with the sound of insect legs skittering on wood. His eyes flick over each sack, as though weighing its worth against the lives it might have saved. Around him, the air carries the scent of damp wool, unwashed skin, and the faint sweetness of grain that will never touch the lips of those who grew it at the edge of the green. A hut sags inward under the burden of ice. The thatch roof drips slowly in the pale light, each drop freezing before it reaches the ground. Inside, the air is smoky and dim. A young girl sits cross-legged on the packed earth floor, mending a torn glove with thread pulled from an old hem. Her breath drifts upward, curling toward the rafters where it mingles with the smoke that refuses to leave. The only sound is the rasp of her needle through the leather and the faint rattle in her chest when she breathes. From beyond the fields comes the cry of an animal long sharp and abruptly silenced. The girl's needle stills. She glances toward the door, eyes wide, then returns to her work without a word. As night falls, the village drifts toward the church. It is not worship that draws them, but the promise of walls and a shared warmth. The pews fill with bodies wrapped in patched cloaks, shoulders pressed close, heads bent as though in prayer, though few lips move. The air smells of tallow, damp stone, and human closeness. The priest stands at the altar, his cassock worn thin, his voice rough as he recites the psalms. Each word seems carved from the air, slow and heavy, falling into the silence between breaths. In the shadows near the altar, the bone from the day's broth hangs from a cord, turning slowly in the draught. No one speaks of who hung it there or why. Perhaps it is an offering to God, perhaps to the dead, or perhaps to the hunger itself, hunger that has become as constant as the wind, as present as the frost on every window. The candlelight catches the bone's smooth curve, and it glows faintly, almost holy. Yet it is only a bone, worn and emptied, waiting like the rest of them for the spring that may never come. Beyond the church walls, the night presses in. The snow falls again, soft at first, then heavier, swallowing the prints on the road and the smoke rising from the chimneys. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once and is silent. Inside, the priest's voice fades, replaced by the slow breathing of the gathered, each exhale mingling with the next, as if the village itself breathes as one. And in that fragile breath lies all that remains, hope as thin as the broth in the pot, but enough to carry them, for now, into the next day's cold. The wind moves like a restless ghost through the empty lanes, carrying with it the faint sting of smoke. No one dares name its source. It could be the forest, brittle and dry, surrendering to a careless spark. It could be a village, like their own, set alight by raiders or by desperate hands, hoping to drive hunger away with flame. No one asks. In winter, questions can be as dangerous as cold steel. Frost flowers bloom across every window pane, white lace against the dim interiors, each petal delicate enough to vanish at the touch. They are beautiful in the way that bones are beautiful, fragile, final. Behind one such pane, the buyer holds its last living wealth, a single cow. Its hide stretched taut over its frame, ribs pushing like the fingers of the grave. Steam curls from its nostrils into the gray half-light, a heartbeat of warmth in the stillness. A boy no older than 12 approaches, boots crunching on the frozen hay. He carries a bucket as though it might break. The milk that falls is thin, tinged with an unnatural blue, but it is all there is. He stares at it for a long time before setting it aside, unwilling to drink it, unable to throw it away. The snow comes not in thick, soft drifts, but in dust-like flakes, as if the sky has grown tired of generosity. They sift down in slow motion, the ash of a season that has burned away everything green. In the market square, the blacksmith works without the comfort of a roaring forge. He nurses a single coal like a dying star, shaping nails with its faint heat. Each hammer strike is deliberate, slow, echoing off the stone walls like the hollow beat of a lonely heart. A woman passes, wrapped in a patched wool cloak, the hem stiff with frost. She carries a bundle of sticks bound in rough rope. Her back is curved, not from the weight, but from the long years that have pressed her down, as though the winter has learned how to crush without touch. She pauses at the steps of the church. The door is heavy oak, carved long ago with angels whose faces have been worn into shadows by centuries of hands and storms. Her gloved fingers brush the wood, feeling the grooves where eyes once looked down in blessing. She does not enter. That night, the family sits together in the dim glow of a fire that has begun to falter. Shadows cling to the beams above, thick as cobwebs. There is no food on the table, only memory. They speak softly of other winters, of great tables laid heavy with bread and salted meat, of steaming pottage that filled the air with herbs, of voices singing in tongues the children have never heard outside of their parents' reminiscence. The youngest asks for a song, but no one begins it. The father reaches beneath the bench and brings out a crust of bread so hard it could serve as a stone. He sets it in the center of the table as if it were a relic. They do not eat it. They simply look at it as though its presence alone might feed the soul. The smell of smoke clings to their hair, the taste of emptiness thick on their tongues. Outside, the night deepens. From the edge of the forest comes the first long howl, mournful and deep. Then another joins, and another, until the air itself feels strung with sound. The wolves are closer this year. Hunger drives them from the dark places, just as it drives the villagers into the small circle of firelight. The howls weave through the night like threads in a tapestry that will never be finished. Each call a reminder that winter has no mercy, no boundary, and no end in sight. And when the fire finally sighs into embers, the family does not speak again. Their eyes drift to the small, cracked window where frost flowers bloom unseen in the dark. Somewhere out there, the world still burns. Somewhere out there, the next chapter of their survival waits to be written. The river lies in silence beneath its frozen skin, a pale mirror that hides the slow pulse of water moving somewhere deep below. Only in the places where the thaw has bitten through does the current murmur faintly, as if whispering secrets no one is meant to hear. Along the banks, the willows bend low beneath the snow, their branches knotted and heavy, like the hair of someone too tired to comb it. Each bough dips toward the ice as if in prayer, the weight of winter pulling every living thing toward the earth. At the edge of the village, a woman crouches beside the trap she laid the night before. Her fingers are red and raw, her breath a thin cloud in the air. The trap is empty. No hare, no bird, only a single black feather caught between its teeth. She turns it over in her palm, the cold sinking into her skin, and slips it into her pocket, as though it were a coin of silver. In times like these, even a feather feels like proof that the world still moves, that some living thing passed this way. In the night to the Reeves Hall, the air smells of damp grain and old smoke. Sacks are stacked in the corner, counted by torchlight, each one guarded with the suspicion of a man holding treasure that cannot be replaced. A handful of spilled kernels glitter faintly on the packed earth floor, and no one dares to touch them. Near the doorway stands a man with hollow cheeks and eyes that do not lift from the ground. He has come to beg, though his voice is trapped in his throat. He waits for a mercy that may never be given, and each moment he waits is a silent confession of how low hunger has brought him in the chapel. The candles have burned to stubs, the wax spilling down in slow rivulets that harden into shapes resembling strange, uncharted maps. A boy sits alone in the front pew, tracing these hardened rivers with his finger, while the priest's voice rises and falls in the litany of the saints. The Latin words sound like wind in a distant place, holy but unreachable. Outside, the snow gathers higher against the stone walls, sealing the village tighter in its cold embrace. It swallows the sound of footsteps until all that remains is the muffled thud of boots fading quickly into nothing. The hunters return in silence. The frost clings to their beards and lashes. Their spears drip with ice instead of blood. No game, no meat, just the shame of empty hands carried home through the deepening snow. One leans his weapon against the wall and stares at it as though it has betrayed him. Another lifts his hood to hide his eyes. In this season, failure is not just disappointment, it is a sentence that spreads to every mouth in the house that night. A handful of villagers climb into the loft above the stable, seeking the warmth of each other's bodies more than the thin blanket they share. The air smells of straw, of animal breath, of the faint temps of oil from the sputtering lamp. They speak little. The voice that breaks the silence does so in song, humming a tune from midsummer's past, when the fields were green and the nights were long and sweet. For a moment, they all remember the feeling of dancing barefoot in grass, the taste of bread, still warm from the oven. For a moment, the hunger loosens its grip, but moments are fragile things in winter. The song ends, the lamp gutters and steadies again. Somewhere below, the horses shift in their stalls. The woman from the riverbank sits apart from the others, her fingers resting lightly on the feather in her pocket. In the dim light, she takes it out and lays it on the wooden beam beside her. Its black surface catches the last flicker of the oil lamp, holding the light as though unwilling to give it back. No one speaks of it, but they all look, each understanding in their own way that survival has become a matter of trading in such small mercies outside. The wind rises, moving through the empty streets and rattling the shutters. The snow continues to fall. Each flake, another thread in the shroud winter, is weaving around the village. And somewhere beyond the frozen river, beyond the bowed willows and the buried fields, the forest waits. The next hunt will go there, into the dark where mercy is rare and hunger has sharper teeth than wolves. The fields lie broken and lifeless, their frostbitten stalks jutting from the snow like the bones of a battlefield long forgotten. Each gust of wind snaps them with a brittle sound, sharp and hollow, a chorus of death whispered across the empty earth. Beyond this white wasteland, the forest waits in silence. Its pines stand in ranks, their shoulders heavy with snow, their dark shadows leaning forward as if listening, as if keeping counsel with the cold. The air between them is thick with stillness, broken only by the faint rustle of branches brushing together in the wind like old secrets. From the edge of that shadowed tree line, a figure emerges. The shape is hunched beneath a cloak of stitched furs, leather scraps sewn in mismatched patches, every seam telling a story of barter and repair. The sled they drag is piled with kindling, bound with rope, so worn it frays at the edges. The runners scrape along the frozen ruts, each screech like a wounded cry that slices through the still air. Their breath hangs in the wind, ghostly and slow, a sign that they have walked a long way through the forest's silence. The village does not greet them. Doors remain barred, shutters drawn tight against the night. The faintest threads of candlelight spill from cracks, trembling in the darkness like trapped fireflies. Not even the dogs bark anymore. They lie curled and thin against the warmth of whatever corner will have them. The old inn squats at the heart of the square, its timbers groaning as they shift in the cold. Once, laughter and the clatter of mugs spilled from its open door, the air thick with the smell of ale and roasting meat. Now, it breathes only the sound of its bones settling deeper into the frost. Inside, a family sits close to the hearth. There is no meat roasting, no bread baking, only the soft hiss of melting snow in an iron pot. The damp scent rises into the air, mixing with the faint tang of smoke. They hold their hands out toward the flames, palms open as though catching something that might slip away. A carved figure of Saint Bridget stands on the mantel, her paint darkened by years of soot, her eyes fixed on something far beyond the cold room. The matron rises, her joints stiff, her fingers cracked and raw from the wind. She adds another log to the fire, the sound of it catching a brief moment of triumph before settling into the quiet hiss of burning sap. Outside, the watchman moves through the snow with the slow rhythm of someone who knows the land can turn against him in a heartbeat. His spear is wrapped in rags so that the metal will not fuse to his skin in the cold. He circles the village, eyes on the forest's black mouth, the still fields, the lines of smoke drifting upward. At the well, he stops. The rope hangs frozen in place, the bucket locked halfway down, as if winter's hand itself has gripped it. He touches the wood, feels the ice bite at his palm, and lets it go. The stars above are too sharp to be beautiful. They glitter like shards of broken glass scattered across the vault of heaven, unblinking and unyielding. Somewhere in the deep dark, an owl calls. The sound is patient, deliberate, as if marking time not in hours, but in hungers. The watchman exhales, and his breath curls upward, reaching toward the stars before vanishing into their indifference. He turns toward the inn, his boots sinking into the snow with each step, the earth seeming to pull at him, to hold him still. It is not just the weight of the cold that drags at his body, but something heavier, the knowledge that this winter has teeth, and it has not yet bitten its last dot. Soon the forest will be the only place left to search for food. Soon the doors that are shut now may not open again. And somewhere in the silence, winter listens, patient as the owl, certain that it will claim what it is owed.